I'm not writing anything.
I'm reading.
What?
Boy.
That's not me.
Patrick, I'm assuming you see the text.
I haven't typed a word in the keyboard.
No, it's wrong, David. We got it.
You can't hide, David. We're not going to let you.
While that's being worked on, just a question before we vote to adopt the agenda.
Yep.
This was from Wednesday's meeting. One of the things we were going to discuss was the committee meetings and Zoom, and because there was some discussion about special events. So I want to make sure we're talking about that today because we said we would.
I think.
Good reminder.
Well,
Thank you, David.
I think there are some things that we can address that, but there was some contract stuff that we did not want to make public because.
Yeah, but we just wanted
so
we wanted to talk. We want to talk about our protocol there.
Okay, we just need to change the motion to adopt then.
Can we change the
Brian,
motion
I'll
to
second if you do.
So I'm going to
Brian,
have
are you going
adopt agenda with the addition of Zoom meeting discussion.
Yeah,
Or,
that's
committee.
perfect, Susan.
Committee Zoom.
Thank you, Zoom. Thank you, Zoom. Thank you, Susan.
Since I was the one,
Yeah, I'm Susan with the Zoom.
since I was the person who actually made the call.
Correct.
I'll change my motion.
Thank you.
And I'll
And
second
David,
the
will you-
amended.
And thank you very much, Brian, or Kevin, I appreciate that. All right, so now with that motion amended, Steve is off today, correct? He's doing some CE things, I
That's
believe?
correct.
Perfect.
Yes.
So,
And Nikki's also off. So,
Hi, Susan. Hi, Nikki.
hello.
Hi, Steve. Hi, Steve. All in
No.
one.
So Susan, you want to go ahead and do your update then?
Oh, did we need to?
I will.
We need
Oh,
to.
I'm sorry, yes,
we need to
do.
vote.
Yeah, I guess, sorry about that. I'm way ahead of myself. I'm still looking at the text messages that are making me crazy. Is there any way to delete those?
Yeah, I was going to say the same thing.
Please, that's making me crazy. So just all in favor, aye?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Perfect.
Thank you.
Now we can go ahead and continue on with our meeting. Susan?
Okay, first I'm going to address the Zoom privacy issue that allows us to be hacked. Management talked to legal counsel. They suggested that we put it behind our password protected area. And so with JR's help, we were able to develop, we're going to have identical agendas without the login information on the one that's posted publicly. But that particular agenda will tell people how to get to the information on the calendar that is behind governing, community governance and meetings. It's real easy to get there. I easily found it after JR's instruction this morning, so that should solve our hacking issue.
But it adds to the problem of access, immediate access, if residents all of a sudden want to pop in, correct?
That's correct, but
right.
Tom said as long as we post it within the 72 hours and we tell people the way to get there, because it really spells it out. I'll send you the verbiage later today on the 710 agenda. I've got it posted or got it ready to post. I'll send that to you and you'll see how easy it is. So anyone can also always call and we'll be glad to give them that information.
Excellent, thank you.
I do have one question. Has management considered using a different platform such as WebEx? The Zoom has been known to be hacked, and I was actually pretty impressed that we weren't hacked for so many meetings. But I've been reading articles, especially during the pandemic, how common it is. It seems as though there's a better secure method for WebEx, just from reading. I'm not the expert. So is it something that management has considered?
I know Patrick has looked at some of the other choices. I will tell you Microsoft Teams is having the same issue as Zoom, and Microsoft Teams is being used in a whole lot of other management companies that I know of. Patrick, you want to comment?
Patrick did address
Good morning,
that in
everyone.
an email this week about other platforms being hackable
Yes,
too.
he did.
Yes, I did. Across the top 3 or 4 teleconferencing programs that companies use, Zoom being one of them, Microsoft Teams, Cisco WebEx, and there's GoToMeeting, which has some popularity there. They all fall victim to the same issue when our public information is out there. And so the simple fix, especially since we're all used to using Zoom for a while now, is to take the next step and put it behind that password protected site, which we did already get information that is the best direction to move forward with, especially after my conversations with Zoom technical support. That is the number one cause for Zoom bombing, is public information.
So
Thank you so much. And I did see that email. I just like these things to be said just for the public to hear, because they don't see the email, so everybody understands it. But thank you.
You're welcome.
So Patrick, a technical question on this. I believe that our Zoom ID information has been the same week to week. Will that continue to be the case, or will that change on a weekly basis? My suggestion, it would change weekly, because if we hand out a number and it gets into the wrong hands, then that doesn't help us.
The meeting IDs are different for every meeting. Those
Okay.
have not been the same.
But I thought the
the
weekly
phone
workshop-
numbers that you, I'm sorry, the
I
phone
thought
numbers that you call into remain the same. That's for everyone,
Okay.
for any Zoom customer to call into. But the meeting IDs are very individual, and each meeting has their own. We do
Okay.
not use there's another ID that
Okay, good.
identifies our account, but
Okay,
that's not
good.
being used.
Good, helpful. That's very helpful. Perfect. Sounds like a good way to go.
Yes, go ahead.
Vanessa?
Sam. Yep.
Okay, sorry. I want to jump in. I'm on a different connection today, so I just want to make sure you can hear me. But my question is, and I appreciate that a lot of our residents are sharing the Zoom information onto the back porch and some of those other platforms. I wouldn't want to impede them from doing that, because I think that's how we get a lot of our attendance. Do we think that's where it's coming from, where we're getting the hackers from, or do we think it's just coming from the general posting that's going out about the meetings on our website?
It's now available
Do you
on
have
our
any-
regular website. It's Diane. Yeah, just for those that couldn't hear what she asked, is it because of the sharing that is happening, or is it because of our actual posting? I think once they know that we have meetings, they can get the information unless it's secured behind a back wall. I think
That's
that they
exactly
kind of know
right.
the routine now.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Let's try
Any
it.
more questions about that?
Just try it and we'll move forward.
Right. Well, in our first meeting that we'll have utilizing that, other than committee meetings, they may be already utilizing that, will be our 710 workshop and every meeting moving forward. The goal is to have that meeting posted just as if we were having it on the 3rd of July, and that gives everyone, because some people may not be aware that we're not having a meeting on the 3rd of July, so they'll go in trying to find the information, they'll see how to get there, and they'll see that it's the 10th of July instead. So
Yeah.
hopefully that'll give them enough leeway to get their password and everything and log in for the celebration website. Do we want to move on to GEMS?
Yeah, just a quick comment. I think Steve made a good point. Steve Northridge, thank you. 2 issues: someone joining that shouldn't, and then hacking the account because of the posting. The challenge is because right now it's public. We're not able to actually go through and greet people and put them into a waiting room, which is the ideal thing to do, which we can do in some of our other things, but we're not able to do that in this particular situation, just because we never know how many people are actually signing in. So thank you, Steve. I appreciate that. I think we're set now.
Okay, the gyms, we've had some issues with double booking, residents not arriving at their reserved time, and residents just coming in. So part of that challenge has been that we have had an automated booking system. So they were able to book their times through CROA. And on Monday, the Parks and Rec Committee is going to have them only take requests. And then they'll go in and approve the request or not approve the request to make sure people aren't going more than once a day, or at least booking for more than one time a day. And we're in hopes that that'll solve the issues that we're having there. Any questions?
Sounds like
I don't have any, board, anybody?
Sounds like a good plan. Give it a try.
Yeah, I think it'll work. The next thing on the list is playgrounds. And for our playgrounds, nothing has changed since our discussion 2 weeks ago. So we have that information, Patrick, if you can pull it up, that it's ultimately a board decision on whether or not you're ready to open the playgrounds yet.
I wouldn't even bother to pull it up.
Okay. Yes, there are challenges with it. So, okay. So we're just going to not skip that, but we're going to go on to the next thing.
Yeah, we don't need new challenges. Oh, Brian has a point.
Yeah, go ahead, Brian.
Take playgrounds off the agenda, and the board will request it to go back on the agenda when we hit a point when someone thinks there's common sense to it. But with the clear increase in cases, we shouldn't even be talking about playgrounds or leading people to believe that we think we could do it. I think.
Okay.
Agreed.
Thank you. Agreed.
I've got it on there until it starts decreasing. You had asked for it in 2 weeks, so that's why it was on the agenda.
You're fine.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, the whole conditions are changing, so the rules change now.
But to Susan's point, we asked her to revisit it this week.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
now we'll just move forward. Thank you,
Yeah.
Susan.
Thank you.
Certainly. For the pool update, I'll go to swim lessons last since that's a program partner. We have not had very many concerns other than the one that I saw on the back porch that someone forwarded to us about East Village. Nikki says that what our policy is when the park monitors notice that they're come by and check and there are more than the number allowed at that pool, they stay there and check IDs and ask people if they have any people that are not living in their household, and those are the first ones that they ask to leave. So if you are there with 3 children, your 3 children and a friend for each child, then they are asked to leave. And there have not been issues. Now, we were not aware of the East Village concern from the resident who posted on the back porch, but she says it's been working, and so we'll just continue to monitor a little more closely. Any questions? Okay.
Sounds good.
The basketball court. There have been issues with the basketball court. People have not been social distancing. We have a report from a pool monitor that says that most of the people that are going to the basketball court are not residents. There's been one person that has been an instigator. I'm going to call him an instigator, but someone that has caused issues for us. And Nikki called their parents on, what's today, Friday. So she called them on Thursday morning. And the mother assured Nikki that the child would be talked to. And I looked at the park monitor sheet last night, and it did not say, it said that they were better behaved. Pete Colon, our park monitor, reports that, that there are lots of people not social distancing. They social distance when they see us coming, and then as soon as we're not out of sight, they are back to their regular behavior. So I think it's a board decision on whether or not you want to leave the basketball courts open or not. But it seems to be happening between 4 and 6 or 7 o'clock before the Lakeside Park Monitor comes in, or Lakeside Security comes in.
One of the things we said.
One comment really quick for clarification. I think you said non-resident. Is that correct?
There are some non-residents. Yes.
And
Pete's
with our
email said
security that we have there.
Non-resident. Pardon me?
Okay. So we do still have security that's on site, correct? Are they checking IDs or what's going on there?
They come at 7. And before that, the park monitors are roving, and they go and they check IDs to make sure no one has more than 3 people per ID on the court. And they're high school age kids that are there playing.
Okay, something to think about. Thank you.
I think that goes back to the bigger issue of what we really discussed initially was as we're going through our amenities, do we want to start gating these so that people, unless they're residents and they have a key card, they can't have access? I think that goes back to that same conversation. Any other questions for Susan regarding this?
One thing we talked about last week is that if it wasn't working, we would close it. That's what we said for the basketball courts. We would see if it was working. It sounds like it's not working. Brian has a finger up.
Oh, I can't see. Sorry. Go ahead, Brian.
Oh, sorry.
At some point, we're going to, our block is being called, at some point, we're going to have to shut something down for a week or 2 weeks and say, no, we were serious. And to me, the easiest thing to shut down by phone is to shut it down for a week or 10 days.
Wait just a minute. Somebody is talking in the background. I can't hear. Can you mute yourself, please? Please go ahead, Brian.
Been muted.
Thank you.
It's easy to just shut it down for a week or 10 days and say, hey, we have rules and the rules are not going to be adhered to. We're going to do this. Because I mean, if the gym can't get straightened out, we're going to, rather than permanent shutdowns, I would do reset shutdowns. Like, okay, if we open it again in 2 weeks, play by the rules, or it's permanent. We've got this increase in cases. We can't, and again, for clarity, I've been one of the most liberal people, but I mean, I'm reading the papers and there's zero doubt. So it's time now for us to get serious.
I think there's a bigger issue on that too. We have residents that are wanting us to enforce rules, right? You need to enforce things. Well, unfortunately, our enforcement is, if it's not in our charter, we can't fine them, right? We can't fine them for abusing the system. We can cut off their amenities. Some of the situations we're hearing are the teenagers or whatever are using their parents' cards to get in. So we can do some back check on those. But if they've signed the documents saying that they can go in and they have access, they can get in. Somebody's going to let them in. We can't control that. Other than residents saying, I'm not letting you in. You need your key card, period. So that needs to be residents in that particular situation, not letting in people that don't have their cards. So ultimately, our enforcement as a board is fine. But if we don't, but issuing fines for this seems rather ridiculous. And it's not in our charter to even do so. So you cut off the amenities. Those are our options. Go ahead, David.
Yeah, and part of our enforcement is removing the amenity itself. So with the basketball courts, it's removing the hoops. And I think, we talked about this last week, and we said we were serious. So I think today we should be serious. It didn't work. So let's put it on pause till our next meeting 2 weeks from today. For the basketball courts, basketball courts.
So I think that's something we need to vote on, though.
Absolutely, we need to vote on it.
Yeah, as we change any status from current, we need to actually vote on it.
Absolutely.
At least that's the protocol. That's the protocol we've taken so far.
Absolutely.
Any comments from Kevin or Diana or Brian?
I'll allow Diana to go first. She hasn't said anything, but I do have one final item that I just want to share.
Yeah, Mike, can you hear me?
Go ahead. Yep, you're good.
You're never going to keep the kids from letting their friends in, even with a pass. I mean, they're using their parents' pass to get in. You're never going to keep them from doing that. The only way is to take down the rooms, which is sad to say. But I can't imagine that we're doing any favors by having them congregating downtown, so.
It's
I
temporary.
understand.
It's temporary. It's temporary.
It is.
So I agree with that exactly, Diana. I think right now we have two different issues. We have a short term, we have a long term. Our short term is the COVID and the social distancing. Our long term continues to be the residents and non-residents being in the area when they shouldn't be. So over the next 2 weeks prior to this coming onto the next agenda, I mean, I just as one would like to see what management may have as a long-term solution. If that's fencing, let's go ahead and start reviewing how we go ahead and put the fence up around it. There are certain things that we don't have money for to create a new item, if you will, lack of a better term. We have the money, but we're trying to be responsible and apply the funds to areas that are most important, like cameras and security and protecting what we have and correcting what we have. So I would just like to see, as this does come back on the agenda, that we start looking at the long-term solution instead of just the short-term. But in the meantime, it sends the message to the entire community that, hey, rules are in place for a reason. We are taking this serious.
So just to clarify, our next meeting is not until July 11th. So anything we do between now will
2
not
weeks.
be undone until after July 11th, because that's the next time we're actually meeting. So,
Two
so
weeks.
just,
It's
I just
July
want to
the
make sure that
10th.
we're on the same page. Go ahead, Susan.
July 10th. Yeah.
It's
July.
July 10th.
2 weeks.
So just to clarify, as we're going forward, we're going to 4th of July, all that stuff. Everything will be shut down. So or whatever we vote on will not be revisited until that next meeting. So. Is there anybody that has further questions, comments from the board before, or do you have a motion? Does any motion? Brian?
I'll make a motion. I make a motion that we remove the basketball rims to be revisited again by the board on July 10th. In the communication to the community, we specifically state that the rules were not being adhered to and that we are carefully monitoring the rules on all amenities that we've opened, especially in light of the recent uptick in infections and positive test rates.
I'll second that.
Okay. Further comments, discussion?
The only other comment in terms of the long term, I believe it was a year ago or within the last 2 years that there was some sketches, and I don't know if it came out with a bid. So Michael could look into that from what Todd may have done in terms of fencing and gating for the basketball. I think that was part of also.
Yeah, I think it was basketball, and then also
tennis.
Finishing off those walls and the tennis entrances.
So there may have been some pricing. I don't know if we had pricing or what, but I know there was some sketching of what that might look like.
Okay. So before we vote on the basketball courts, any other comments from the board before I open it up to any residents? Okay. Are there any comments from residents? Help me out here, board, if there's any hands or anything.
I see nothing.
Okay, very good. Then I'll call the vote. David, yes or no?
Yes.
Brian, yes or no?
Yes.
Kevin, yes or no?
Yes.
Diana, yes or no?
Yes.
And I'm a yes.
Reservation?
Got it.
We got a voice
Thank you.
coming in.
Yeah, I heard. I think Patrick just took care of it.
Okay. Thank you.
So is there anything else that we want to address? We've had issues with the gym, we've had issues with the pool, we've had issues with all these. Do we want to just continue going for the next 2 weeks, or do we want to address it now? Because I guarantee you that over the holiday, we're going to have problems. So I just want to make sure that we understand that the management and staff can only do so much. So we are getting deluged with emails with regards to pool and gyms. We get, if not daily, we get at least every couple of days, we get an email regarding an issue on either of those. So we just need to either understand that staff cannot handle all of it, especially over holiday weekends. And I'm not advocating for it. I just want to make sure that everybody is realistic as to what can be done when there's a violation. We can't be everywhere all the time. So I just want to make that So do I have anybody on the board that would like to make any motions or discussion with regards to any other of our amenities?
I will add that go ahead, David.
Go ahead, Kevin.
Go ahead.
Kevin, go ahead.
Okay, sorry. So ultimately, I think that this is, we have 2 weeks. There's going to be a lot of unknowns. There's 7 board members that are all volunteer. We have a management team that, in respect to the size of our community, is fair. It's not an amazing, huge, giant management company because we're being responsible, where we can. So the reality is the residents need to be adults, okay? The residents need to respect the community, respect the rules. I'm going to be very firm on that, and I'm sorry if it comes out blunt. And I would probably be the first one to say it's not going to be any of the residents that tune into these meetings that ever say those comments or have those issues. It's going to be the residents that are not informed or not educated or not wanting to know or understand the rules. Now, with that being said, I think it's premature to go ahead and jump and say, let's go ahead and do this because there might be an issue. But I will say that I will respect the role of the president and the role of the executive director and community manager, that if the 3 of them say, hey, we're having an issue in this area, then over the next 2 weeks, they give Vanessa a phone call and they say, hey, we got to shut it down. And Vanessa can make that decision. And the full board, I know, will support whatever decision she makes because it will be a reasonable, rational decision.
Yeah, this is
comments. Go ahead, David.
Yeah, that's parallel to what I was going to say. Is management is on top of this. Management will be monitoring, and staff will be monitoring this over the as they do every day. And so, if we had to have an emergency board meeting, I mean, Kevin said we can leave it in the hands of the president, which is fine with me. But if we needed an emergency board meeting to do something, we can do that.
Absolutely.
I think it's not like there can be no action for 2 weeks. We will do action, whether it's through the president, as Kevin was suggesting, or polling the board, or however we need to proceed. If we need to take action, we take action. It goes back to Brian's point earlier, and Kevin's point, protecting our amenities, and also protecting our larger community, which is, I think, what we're all about. We're being responsible and doing what collectively we think is best. So it's not like hands off for 2 weeks. It's we'll be monitoring.
I have a better solution rather than having just me make the decision, or whoever, or even doing an emergency board meeting. I think having an email. I mean, the reality is we all need, all 7 board members need to be informed when there's something going on.
Yeah.
Email makes it. You may not be able to get the information right away because it depends upon what your email availability. But I am comfortable if the board is with management sending a message to the board saying we're having an issues with X, Y, and Z. We would like to shut it down, and whoever responds first can shut it down. I think it just, I think they just need some verification process in there somewhere. But the reality is we need to make sure that we're doing things within line. We're following management recommendations, especially with something like this. We can't put staff at risk. Go ahead, Brian.
No, continue. I'll do it after you.
We just can't put the staff and management at risk either. I mean, let's face it, sometimes we've had some issues with residents getting confrontational with other residents. And I'm not comfortable with that either. And our only recourse if that happens is the police, and that's right. Not a good solution. So, go ahead, Brian.
Rather than, I'm happy with an email, but it shouldn't be any board member can make a decision. I would be happy with the president and vice president can make a decision. I fully support, and I'll use the gym as an example. If we're having problems 3 days from now, shut the damn thing down until the 10th, and then it sends a message. The pools, people will cross those bridges, and we do, but it's just time to say we're out of patience. It matters.
And what would you need from us? Oh,
well, I was going to say just
my comment. Vanessa, my comment. Yeah, no, that's me. My comment would be that I agree. If it's if they can't reach at least you or vice president, and at least two board members. So it's not just one person standing alone to make the decision.
That's fair. Yeah, that's fair.
I think that's only fair to the person who has to make the decision. So anyway, that's my thought.
Thanks, Diana. Susan, go ahead.
And I was just going to add to that, as far as level of service goes, typically on any given day of the week, prior COVID, we had 2 to 3 monitors out in the community. Now we are at 5 to 6 monitors, certainly 6 on the weekends. So we have doubled what we normally do to monitor things during this difficult time.
Brian has another point. Yeah.
Barbara Church just sent a posting saying, put it on the back and front porches, et cetera, and that. I would, rather than that, I would think that an email blast is better. Because then it gets out there, it'll make its way to, it'll get posted to the porches by certain people anyway, which is it. I mean, I would be happy with, it could be short and brief, and it could be from Vanessa and David, and it could go out this afternoon and say, there's been a spike in cases. We're taking this serious. In certain places, people have not been following the rules. We just pulled the rims down on the basketball courts, and we will do other things if we have to. Please be responsible and safe.
And David, to your point, yes, we can suspend badges. We have been doing that as we find things that have been going on.
Right.
The challenge is when you have residents that are just letting people in, and we don't have the ability to know who is or isn't letting others in. So yes, I gotcha. Any other comments from the board? Susan, what do you need from us?
I don't think we need anything. I've got notes. I'm texting Nikki that we're going to remove the basketball hoops, so we'll do that immediately. And JR is on the call, so he will communicate to everyone.
Great, thank you. Any other comments? We need to go on to swim lessons, or is there anything else?
Just David, thank you to Susan and thank you to the team. So that's Susan, Steve, and Nikki all in one person today. So thank you for what you've done, what you're doing, and what you're going to be doing. So the trio, thank you, and JR for communication and so forth.
And I think that as over the next couple of weeks too, just as a side note, I think we might want to consider, people are starting to get back into their normal work routines. People are going back to work. We have great attendance today, so I appreciate that from residents. But I do think, especially as we start to open or close amenities and we're pausing on things, I think there was a couple of board members that have reached out to me saying, hey, can we start moving these calls to every other week rather than every Friday? So I think that's something that for the board just to think about, see how we go with the next 2 weeks. But you know, it's starting to get, people are starting to get back on things. So I think it's something that we just need to have a conversation about. So perhaps over this next week or so, the board can contemplate how that would look and see if maybe we can have that conversation. If not our next meeting, at least at our next board meeting.
I think that's a good point. You know, just we have morphed, I think, a couple of weeks ago from this Friday call into trying to be more workshop-y with our regular topics. And then historically, the workshops were either once a month, if that, or then when I was president, it was like twice a month. So, so every other week would be a viable option, and we can discuss that, see how these next 2 weeks go.
Perfect. Any other comments before moving on to swim lessons? So Susan, can you speak on behalf of Nikki with swim lessons?
I can. The Recreation Committee met this past week, and they approved 2 programs that will be on your board meeting agenda for July 22nd, and that is Little Fins, which is survival swim lessons for younger children, and Aqua Yoga, which is a new program with Nina Switters that has not worked with us in the past. Adult Learn to Swim, which is Diane, I believe, also. She is not comfortable enough to have group swim lessons for adults yet, and so she wants to wait until August and present to the committee.
Thank you. Comments, questions from the board?
So this is Kevin. I apologize. As the board knows, I'm out of town. I don't have my notebook with me with my notes from the Recreation Committee last week. The overall, there was a couple of items, and having those committee meetings recorded would help for everybody moving forward. But I think as we are going through the conversation of spikes happening, closures, amenities, and that kind of path, I don't know if it's necessarily fair to say, yes, we're going to approve these things, but they're not actually going to happen. Because to have group events and things like that, especially with one of the vendors saying, hey, we're not comfortable doing groups yet until August, and then going back to what we've said this entire time, which is we're kind of putting a lot of things, events, on hold until the end of August, and continuing to evaluate if things get better. And unfortunately, they just don't seem to be. So I'm happy to see it on the agenda at the end of the month, but it just might be a difficult thing to really make a full vote on.
Certainly.
Thanks, Kevin. Any other comments from the board? Brian, this is your hot topic. You wanted swim lessons. So I expect a little dialogue on you. It's on the agenda because of you. So keep pushing.
Originally, this got on the agenda in January before the world flipped upside down and spun around 3 times. I think this belongs right beside playgrounds on Susan's page, not to be distributed anymore, just because the testing events of the last week or two, can the NBA open? Can Major League Baseball open? Will there be college football? The world changing in the last 2 weeks. So swim lessons doesn't need to be here anymore until we figure out what normal is.
Comments from other board members? Thank you, Brian. Okay. So there's nothing to vote on. We'll just continue moving forward. Is that correct, Susan?
That's correct.
Okay, perfect. Are we good with anything management related? Board, I will open this up to public comments for anything with regards to the opening, anything like that prior to moving on to our sheriff detail. Any public comment? Can I get some help from the board on this one? I see anything?
I see nothing.
Very good. Going. Sheriff detail without CCDD funding. As the CCDD liaisons, that would be Kevin and Brian. I'm going to let you lead the conversation as to what's going on. This happened before the switch over, so go ahead.
You want me to go, Kevin, or you?
I mean, honestly, we can go ahead and do a high level of what's actually happening, but David was the individual I think that really wanted this on the agenda. So I'll listen to him as well. I have comments, but not really much to add to start off the game.
Okay, let me just do a 1-minute briefing, David. Sheriff, we used to have Deputy Jerry here in town. CCD terminated the funding for the community policing part of it and has reallocated that over to detailed units that are watching more for speeders and other things like that. It is my understanding that from a community policing perspective, Jerry rode the bike a lot, got to know people a lot. There was a lot of advantages to that, but he was actually encouraged by Sheriff Gibson not to give tickets for speeding and stuff like that. So, to me, it's a matter of, choice A or choice B, and I don't have a problem with what the CDD did, in all honesty, but I'll turn it over to David now with that as background for where you wanted to go with this.
Yeah, my couple of broad thoughts. One is we have had with CCDD funding the sheriff's detail. If you read, it was in there, the actual contract is in the CCDD board packet for last month, not for June, not for the most recent meeting, but for the May meeting. That actual contract does talk about community policing. And that's what we as a community, as residents as a whole, got to know. Part of what, I think there were 2 benefits to the community broadly. One is the concept of community policing that historically has been very effective and more recently is evolving as a way to go. And second has to do with the person in that position. And so whether it's parents, grandparents, kids, they got to know the sheriff's office through Jerry. So what I wanted to do, at least for today, is to start the discussion about what do we as CROA feel is appropriate for us. And this is not about Deputy Weiland. This is about the concept of community policing. So the question is, what do we think? Now, residents have a hard time anyway with understanding the difference between CROA, CDD, and the other alphabet soup. I think all starting with C, right, Kevin? From the other night. But seriously, the question is, us as an HOA, us as CROA, what do we think is appropriate for us? What do we want to invest in? We know that sheriff's officers drive through celebration. That is part of what our tax dollars pay for. But for us to have a guaranteed presence of a sheriff's deputy, we have to pay extra for that. Just like the CDD is now paying extra, or using that budget line or budget money for specified details at areas that the CDD determines are important for speeding and stop signs. So to me, I just want to start the discussion. What do we want? You know, we have limited dollars. So how do we want to spend our dollars? Do we think an investment in the sheriff's detail is, I'm sorry, and a sheriff's deputy for community policing is something that we want? For context, for the full-time position, Kevin or Brian can correct me, but my understanding is that the budget for CDD was about $100,000 to $120,000 a year. That did not cover the full scope of whatever sheriff services would be, like benefits, as I recall, or the vehicle. So that was negotiated with the sheriff's office. So I think as we have a broad discussion, to me, there's two broad things. One is, what do we as CROA want vis-a-vis community policing? And second, should we decide to move forward, it does not mean that the county and the sheriff's office would be amenable to it. So we do not know that. Whether they would, if we came up with a proposal or a plan, would they accept that or not? That would be a negotiation with them. So I just wanted to start that discussion, talk about what process might be. Is this how we want to spend our money, particularly as we move into budget season? To me, it's the broad picture. Do we want to use some of our dollars, $50,000, $100,000, $120,000 a year for community policing approach? Is that of value to us? And if we decide so, then we would want to say, here's the scope of work, here's what we would want.
I'll open this up to other board comments.
So I'll jump in here. Overall, the issue of security is something that isn't new in the community when it comes to having policing and having presence of the officers. It all started originally in CROA, I believe, was the individual that contracted the sheriff to go ahead and have extra services in the community. Celebration is a community that, yes, things cost a couple of dollars extra because we're needy a little bit sometimes, right? We're proud of where we live. We want to go ahead and have the best of the best. And in order to do that, it takes money to make it happen. So we went ahead and said, all right, we'd like to go ahead and guarantee that we have a sheriff in this community X hours per week. Then it ended up being recognized, and I think it was back when Don was on the board, the CROA board, where they said, we can actually get a government rate. We can get an interlocal rate by having the sheriff go over to the CCDD. At the end of the day, yes, they're two different entities and they're two different budgets, but they are all paid by people within the community of Celebration. So every resident is still being paid. It made those dollars stretch. Now, the CCDD, and I'm going to say something that is fact, even though it seems opinion as well, but it's almost like their budget never changes, but their scope continues to be limited. And that frustrates me. And we can talk about that when it comes to the overall maintenance, whether it's the trees, right, in front of your houses that are maintained or not maintained, replaced, not replaced. And that same logic is now happening here. our sheriff, our community, our owners all pay to the sheriff's office. They should all go ahead and be receiving that feedback. And I would actually encourage the community, or us at least, to provide the details for the sheriff's office, to go ahead and share the concern of lack of coverage or limited coverage in the community, if that is their opinion and feeling. When it comes to the dollars, okay, I will say that we do, you know, let's be a little innovative here. We do go ahead and we spend money for security at Lakeside. If that's something that we are factoring into the budget for 21, of having that, I believe it's somewhere around $50,000 just off the top of my head, to go ahead and have that security at Lakeside, do we find a way to partner with the CCDD and say, hey, listen, as we develop 2021, this is something that our mutual residents would like to see in celebration. That is an additional sheriff detail. We can go ahead and allocate X dollars towards it, and whether that is, you know, that we send to them, I don't know how we would make that work necessarily, but let's contribute together to make this happen for our residents, but at your government rate, because we would get a lot more bang for a buck by going through the CCDD than we will on the CROA dollar. So that's kind of my high level thoughts just as we open this conversation.
Other board comments? Brian, Diana? I will read on here. I think there's a couple of comments just from public that I'll read out here. And but before I read them, I want to acknowledge that I do think that there are benefits to community policing. I think it's fair to say that Town Hall has a very good relationship with Jerry, even now that he's gone. And I think that as a community, we benefit from those relationships. I will say that I actually went to the CCDD meeting along with David back before all of the roles changed for the liaisons, and I did speak against the cutting of community policing. I think that it's a disservice to celebration. I think we've come a long way. As we grow, I think that our relationships with the entities, county, sheriff, everything is going to be more and more critical. So that's just my thoughts on this. I'll read what is on here. It says, Dan, thank you very much for for the comments. Jerry provided a positive influence to the community, consistent benefit rather than the one-time cost. And then David also agreed to. Any other comments? Kevin also had comments in there that the position's missed.
I have this is David. I have a technical question for Kevin. Just you know the answer, but it didn't come out. You said the CDD budget never changes, but their scope does change. The implication
their scope does not. I'm sorry, you're right. They eliminate things that should be their responsibility.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
They pass it. Yeah. They pass things on quite often.
Okay. So what you're saying?
But that's my opinion.
No, I hear that. So I just wanted to clarify that the scope goes down. Because you could say the scope does change.
The level of service has
service is going down. That's what you're, okay, that's fine.
That's
fine. I just wanted to clarify. It's rather than my budget doesn't change, but I'm doing more work. That's another interpretation. But that's not what you're saying.
Their budget does change, actually. It goes up because it's all, as we get more residents, they actually get a greater percentage. So their budget does go up. And
actually, you're right in that aspect, yes.
In that aspect, yes.
And they have the same ability to raise rates just like we do. So I think it's important to recognize that they are two different entities, but they do have the ability to do the same thing we do. Go ahead, Brian.
I was on mute, sorry. The issue in my mind is CDD discussed this for quite a while, got some resident feedback. I think a year ago there was a lot of resident feedback. This year there was a lot less resident feedback, and I think it was the war of attrition, and they just won the war of attrition. If we said we were going to put it in our budget following David's idea, and you did it through CDD, why do you think anything would be different if CDD was the one driving the bus, since they have made the decision they have made after a lot of exhaustive conversation. So that's where I struggle with this one, because I certainly don't want this to become anything we don't like. We'll just move over to the CROA budget and it'll be CROA's problem and they can take all.
Well, they've already,
Well, one thing
they've
to
already
note-
begun that with, well, just as a side note, they've already begun that because they're doing with easement trees, which will be coming up soon. So there is a definite push towards financial responsibility back onto the homeowner for many of these issues, and that's not going to change. So
One thing to note, and this is not to be political here, but by looking at the names submitted who are running for the CCDD board for this November, there is going to be a majority change just by the names submitted, regardless of who wins. So I'm sorry, that's incorrect. There's one incumbent that's running. So if that individual stays on, then there's still three. But my mindset behind that is I encourage the community to go ahead and discuss this topic with all the candidates. November is closer than we think, even though these days drag on sometimes. November is closer than we think, and the sheriff is also up for a re-election. So these are things that this conversation, we can start, having it, and we can save that decision once the new or the same individuals are reseated and seated.
And just carrying that a little further, to me, it's what is it that we want? We value, a lot of residents, and me personally, values community policing. Again, it's not about the personality. I think it does take a unique personality. So it's not about the individual, it's about the nature of the position. With us spending, Kevin was right, we're spending, what is it, about $3,600 a month for the lakeside security. So that's about 50 grand.
right.
It's about 50 grand a year. So, might we want to get into going on Kevin's point with CDD running, and then Brian's point, not dumping things on CROA. Maybe there's some cost sharing. Maybe we say we do want community policing. We think that's an important presence. Our residents say that's important. I know there was a lot of email dialogue back in February when Vanessa mentioned she and I both were vocal at the CDD meeting, and there was a lot of discussion, and I think in the month that followed. So what might that look like? What do we want? What are we willing to pay for? I think that just becomes an open discussion. I know we're doing cameras, that's been approved and more to come. That's all part of our overall security plan. What else does it look like? And I think this budget season is a good time to discuss that. And again, what a scope of work might look like should we want to go down that route. And then some cost sharing, if you will.
any other board comments? The reason why it was on the agenda was to make sure the community is aware of it. So the board actually has an opportunity to discuss it. Do we want to provide any specific direction as a board to management, or does management need any specific direction regarding this? Or are we good with just, this is what's happening to the community? Susan?
I would ask.
I think it'll come out in the budgeting process. So we'll work through it as we head to the 2021 budget with Brian and the finance committee, and then ultimately the board.
Good. Any other comments from the board?
Yeah, one other comment. I am not asking JR to unmute himself or to respond. But I think it was you, Vanessa, who referenced JR and having a good relationship with Jerry, and Jerry still continuing in his new role, but helping with some planning, but just some future thinking about the role of community policing, the role of a dedicated person as JR and his team are planning events or other initiatives, large events and smaller events, just as we think post-pandemic. So just, I would be interested, not today, but just in the future, JR and his team putting some thoughts together about the value or not value as it ties into budgeting and that role.
Brian?
I would be very uncomfortable with this coming out of the budgeting process. I mean, how does it logically come out of the budget process? There's either got to be a community outcry that, yes, we want this, so CCD and CROA sit down together and figure it out, or I mean, $100,000 is not a rounding error. That would be real money that we would have to come up with either through an increase or something. And so either there's a desire to, we've had this conversation, there's 26 people on or whatever there is. You know, either something really gets raised as an outcry or it doesn't, but to just say the board's going to go through the budget process and this is going to percolate or it's not going to percolate it's a tough way to go.
Can I
agree.
think it's important, just really quick. I think one thing, to Kevin's point about elections coming up and all that also, I think our big moment of decision making and where community pressure is going to come in is when Halloween happens and we don't have community policing. So that's just a side note that with big crowds, we really used the sheriff's department, whether it be for 4th of July, any big events. It was pretty important to have that relationship with the county sheriff. So just something to keep in mind. I would hate to have that be the big blow up point. So go ahead, whoever was going to make a comment. Kevin, I believe you were.
No, I'm good overall. One question, Brian, are we putting, or I mean, it's unknown, but is it possible that we're putting these security at Lakeside in the budget for next year? Or is that going to be a capital item that we just kind of, is that earmarked or not?
Right now, it is in the budget. The one thing everybody's got to be aware of is the reason we did the security at Lakeside is because it starts at 7 and ran till like 2 in the morning or something like that. The sheriff's deputy was not along at those hours and the park monitors weren't along at those hours. So the reason we put it there is there was no coverage downtown. So if we choose to strike it, then we've got to go right to your other conversation, Kevin, is okay, what are we going to do to replace it in some form or manner about, you know, restricting access or whatever we're going to do. The whole security thing gets complicated, but I don't, based upon the conversation we had last year, and it's in our operating, it's not in our capital, it's in the operating budget. And I don't see how.
Okay, that answers that. That's perfect, because as the conversation continues.
Right, it continues unless we say we don't do it. And if we don't do it, then I think we have to have the conversation about, do we just run the risk for a month or two and see what happens? Or do we put an alternative control in place?
Okay, just helps me understand if we have something earmarked for this discussion once new individuals or repeat individuals are seated on those boards and areas. Thank you.
And we also do have proposed, I think in the July board meeting, increased camera coverage in those areas. So that
At all of our facilities.
Yeah, in all the facilities, but in particular, we've seen the sketches for Lakeside.
Correct.
I think our conversation is bigger than cameras.
Yes.
I think
yes.
We're covering that one. This is a conversation that is definitely beyond the scope of where CROA has wanted to go in the past. So I just want to make sure that we acknowledge the fact that we have left at least the board, as long as I've been participating, which is 2015 at some level, has always said, no, this is really a CCDD issue. But I think that's something that we need to address in general. I'll also point out Eileen's comment, community policing should include residents being required to follow basic community laws, such as running stop signs and basic helmets, so bicycle helmets. So yeah, we agree with that. Any other comments from the board prior to, and I will open it up briefly to public comments. I'd like to keep them quick though, because we would like to finish up the rest of our agenda here. Board comments?
I just
Final
think
thing, communication is big. Let's just keep mentioning this in any management report, in every meeting that we have moving forward. We might catch somebody else's ear and keep this conversation going so the community is aware.
Okay.
Yeah,
any other comments?
Yeah, I just want to, Kevin's point, and just keep thinking about what community policing would look like, because it's really more about being more proactive and having an identified individual that residents feel comfortable talking with. We just know that there's a continual presence. It's not 9 to 5 every day. So there's some irregularity in the hours. And I think, if going back to Vanessa's point of Halloween, so that would be an interesting dovetail. That's one event, which I think this year is on a Saturday. But, you know, where is that budget from, I think that's mainly sheriff details, but a lot of the planning with the community police person. But we'll have to keep discussing this and see what the community dialogue is on this. We may want to have a Zoom town meeting on this topic. But I think let's let it percolate for a little bit and see what emerges.
Okay. Any other, quickly, any other board or any other public comment regarding this other than what's already been addressed here? If your comment and your insight has been shared already by somebody, we would appreciate just acknowledging the fact that, yeah, we're good. If you could raise your hand, board, I'm gonna need your help if there's any public comment.
I see none.
Very good. Okay, let's move on to the next agenda item. The website update from the technology committee. Kevin, I believe you sent some information out to us. Please, oh, go ahead. You can hold tight to your web.
You went to it quicker than I expected. I put the note out there for those that don't see. I do have to log off after this, but I was hanging tight for this conversation. Go ahead, Brian.
This is in regards to the ADA for our website, Kevin.
Yes.
And on the technology committee, Kevin and I both sat in on the meetings, and I had actually sent emails to the board too. One of the things that's been happening is that there's been a lot of lawyers, looking for easy lawsuits, and they've sued communities about websites not being ADA compliant. We had said we needed to have ours checked, done fast by the committee. Patrick is on. We said we wanted to accelerate this. Patrick, has there been any work happening? Can you brief us?
Good morning, everyone. So yes, we did reach out to Larson, and we're still waiting for the official opinion from Larson so that we can provide that to the committee next week and then subsequently the board. But you did hit it right on the head that this is something that has been going around with certain advocacy groups. And so at the moment, I do have some bids from companies and just our conversation to see what it would take to bring our website into compliance, and still waiting on, we'll wait for Larson to come back to us with their opinion on whether or not we fall into that category or if we are pretty much a sitting duck waiting to get sued.
So my recommendation on this one, Vanessa, would be that we, rather than up above where it says management update on facilities, maybe Susan, we just ought to make this management update. And we probably here ought to just say website ADA compliance. And we just ought to keep it up there, and that way it keeps it front and center so that people know we're being proactive on this matter. We have a technology committee coming up. We'll get the update from Larson and all that, and that way we can keep the board apprised in snippets, and we know we're moving forward with something that matters.
Thank you. I
I
agree with
agree with
that.
that, Brian. Overall, I think having that CYA is important right now. My concern overall was that this is something that I understand that Larson actually brought up to management's attention. Now, Larson brought this item up to management's attention, and then it was brought up to the committee. And then the way the board found out is through board communication, thankfully from Brian, and that information came to the board at that time. So I just want to make sure that go ahead, Patrick.
Sorry, I did want to clarify that the information was forwarded by Arias Bossinger to pretty much all their clients. And so that's how we actually became aware of it. So we're actually going back to Larson to get the official opinion.
And again, I referenced earlier, I don't have my notebook on me, but
No, you were absolutely, your memory serves you right. I did mention Larson at the technology committee meeting, but I misspoke. I got that information incorrectly from Steve. So
that changes everything.
I'm just clarifying.
Thank you very much, because I was frustrated. That it was Tom that said it to us, and then kind of just left us out there high and dry. So that was not the case. So I will take that frustration in that area back. But so that makes sense. Thank you. The item, and the reason why I brought that up, just so the board knows, is we had management run the contract that we do with everything through legal when we got the new website. Ironically, the date that this was delivered to, that I learned of this, was 364 days since we signed the contract for the brand new website. So my frustration was, this is a brand new item that we just paid a lot of money for, that we were understanding would be in compliance. The secondary to that is we also pay a annual maintenance fee, which when I ran through that contract as well, it goes ahead and expressed that it is a, we cannot make changes to the platform. Yeah, we can go ahead and change colors and pictures and what have you, but the platform, which is what ties into the ADA in some aspect, is not there. The final comment that I just want to add for the public and for everybody to understand is, as I understand it, this, there is no actual ADA guideline for websites. It is almost like a, give it a try, and if we think we have a fight, we're going to go after you for it. There's no official ADA guideline. It is attorneys that are, for lack of a better term, coming through and bullying small guys for a payout. So I just want to make that very clear. It is a guessing game, and this is more of a CYA, and as long as our attorney, Tom Slayton, is good with it, then we can probably disregard some other things later on. So sorry for that run-on, but it's a very interesting situation.
And just one quick comment to,
Go ahead, Susan.
go ahead.
No.
Just one quick comment to add. Arius Bossinger does our collections. Tom Slayton with Larson and Associates is our general counsel. I think it's for the audience out there to know it's not just some random attorney.
Thank you. And I think it's also important, too, to recognize the fact that we do have many residents that have disabilities. And it is important to recognize that we also have a duty and an obligation to make sure that they have the same access. So although we may or may not be required to, I think it would be important for us to make sure that if it's having captions, having something that meets guidelines so that everyone can be an active participant, I think that would be important, especially since they don't have the ability right now to even go into the building because it's closed. So I just would like to recognize
100%.
the fact
Thank you for that clarification. And that my topic is more about getting threatened for a lawsuit through this way. That was my passion, but thank you. That we will always go ahead and do the best we can to make everybody every access easy and equal.
Any other comments with regards to the website and update from the technology? Public comment with regards to this? We good? Okay. Then the Amphitheater irrigation solution, it's in the July action item. Do you want Mike to reference this, or are you going to be Mike today too, Susan?
I'm not going to be Mike today, but I will tell you, since I've been in Celebration, which is almost 5 years now, the amphitheater has been a problem area as far as the grass goes, the dirt, because the water pressure from Toho, South Toho, has not been strong. We cannot make it water that area well. So Mike has been working with Yellowstone to come up with a solution because, again, we're at the point where it needs maintenance. So, Mike, you can take it from here.
Mike, I think you could unmute yourself.
Yeah.
All right, can everybody hear me?
Yep, you're good.
Okay. Yeah, and there's one thing I noticed when I started here, that was an area that needed some work. The last thing I wanted to do is just throw a Band-Aid on it or, repeat anything that's been done in the past by throwing new sod down and not changing anything else and get the same result. Talking with Doug about it, we realized that we're having some water issues and pressure issues. We've changed the irrigation to run during the day, which has helped, and we've seen some growth. So we know that has been a factor in this. We also had some nematode issues, which have been treated and resolved. But one thing I was thinking, I was actually just joking around with Doug, is why don't we just throw a pump in the pond and get the water from that? And that's actually what we're kind of looking at doing. working with CDD and their irrigation on how we can bypass what's run there currently, so it doesn't affect any of the residential or the other parks that, you know, that feed off that line. Basically, it would be adding a pump to the pond and tapping into the existing lines that feed the amphitheater and that one stretch between the amphitheater and that other field with pond water, which will give it the right coverage and allow the grass to grow properly. Doug has been working with CDD on the approvals and everything needed on that aspect, which we should see by next week. But the last thing I wanted to do is put down sod and not have a fix for it. But I think this is something that will give the water needed to make that area look the way it should.
Thanks, Mike. Any questions from the board regarding this?
Mike, this is David, just a technical question. Is it not true that all the ponds are interconnected so that if you're taking water from this one pond, it's not just a matter of coming from this pond, but it's actually drawing from the collective system? Is that a true statement or generally true?
Let me find an answer for that one. I don't want to commit either way. That I'm not sure about. But I know nothing along those lines have been brought up in the discussions to this point. But I'll find an answer for that.
Yeah, my only question and caution is, you know, do we run a risk of using too much water and it causes a problem for the pond? That's the question. And I think the answer is no. I think the answer is no. And I think there is more of an interconnectedness among at least some or all ponds.
Thank you. Any other board comments or
questions? Just a curiosity, nothing urgent.
Sure.
Questions, comments? All good? Mike, thank you so much. I think that it's good to have some problem solving going on with issues that has been a long-standing, to Susan's comment, that has been that whole amphitheater area has just seemed to be, between the maintenance of the actual structure and everything else, we've had some challenges. So thank you very much for staying on top of it and doing some problem solving. It's always great to have some fresh eyes and coming up with some new solutions. So thank you for that. Any other questions, comments for Mike? Mike, thank you so much. Have a great weekend.
All right, thanks. You too.
Future workshop topics.
Well, you get that information every week, and Brian had suggested some changes to it to kind of give us some front and center, those things that need to be addressed. And so on the July agenda, I have the farmers market downtown. I took off swim lessons. We have a home business district application that was turned in, I think, Monday or Tuesday, that didn't make the board packet, that just needs, it's an action item, approval of whether or not the home business district condo could be used for the service that's in there. It's a board. The board usually gives their approval to that. And that's all I have on the agenda right now. You may have told me one other thing. The basketball courts will be addressed. So what else do we want on there?
We have the maintenance vehicles, lease versus purchase for July 10th, right?
We can do that.
Okay.
Yes.
Is that correct? Any other things that we wanted to put on there?
Is anyone reading the emails I'm sending?
Yes.
Yes.
I mean, I've got silence from 3 or 4 people, and I'm trying to get some big picture items that are going to drive the budget.
You want me to nag you some more, Brian? Or am I nagging you enough?
Well, I think we're looking for broader. I know Brian and I have talked about this. We just need to make sure that it's not just, we need to make sure that everybody's, we get all 7 board members' opinions on this.
Yes. Is there anything that would be helpful at this point in July the 10th, that ties into budget or ties into capital improvements? We want to have some general discussions there. I know you have a finance committee meeting. I'm not remembering when it is.
If we want to take July 10th and take the agenda that Susan just said, but then we're going to have to take like July 20, if we go to every 2 weeks, so I just, which that wouldn't bother me. You know, but then we need to take like July 24th and probably the next one. And as a board, we're going to have to deal with some of these darned issues and really start having some serious conversations.
So, so to that point, let's start doing budget conversations on the 10th. We have the time. Let's start, and then we can set a better parameters for the following one.
And that's perfectly fine. And I'll be happy to work with Susan on how we start structuring this. But David responded, and Vanessa and I've spoken, but at some point we need other board members to say, go with God, let's roll.
Maybe just some broad parameters. My only caution with July 10th is that is right before Neil comes. And is there anything that's premature there? I mean, that's just a question. I guess we should just go ahead and start those discussions.
I think starting it on July 10th to at least set the parameters for what the future will look like is reasonable. That way, when Neil comes on, he'll already know, okay, this is the direction we're headed. Is that reasonable to
yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me.
Brian, does that get it on the... Go ahead.
Go ahead, Vanessa.
I was just going to say, Brian,
Steve emailed. You go.
My only comment was, Brian, does that meet a timeline that is reasonable for your finance committee?
Right, because with these other topics, July 10th will really be setting the table, and then July 24th will probably be nothing but these topics related to
right. Well, I knew that maintenance vehicles is something that lease versus purchase would be something that would impact your budget. So I think that's something that we need to go forward on too.
In all honesty, what I said in my email the other day is I would just take lease or buy maintenance vehicles and give it to the finance committee and let them do it. I'm not even sure the board needs to deal with that other than the finance committee recommends. I think it would make it easier on the board.
I'm good with that too.
I'm fine with that.
Do you want it removed from the board meeting on the 10th and then just put onto the finance committee?
Yep. Yeah. I would be happy.
Okay.
And that'll give us a little more time on the 10th to really set the table. And before Susan posted, I'll have something put together that can be like the construct of what we're going to talk about on the 10th and how it'll lead to the next meeting or two.
Great. Susan, it's all you. Wait a second. Susan's been trying to talk and I interrupted.
Oh, sorry. I'm sorry.
No. I was just going to say, Steve published a preliminary timeline for the budget yesterday, I believe. So we have something to start with, and we can discuss that further on the 10th.
Published to you or published to us? I don't remember seeing that.
I think it was published to everyone. We had a leadership team meeting yesterday.
Brian's saying no. I don't remember seeing it.
Okay. Well,
so
we've got an idea. We'll share it with you.
Yeah, that was my question. At what point, historically, there's been an all-day budget meeting. That may not be what we need this year with the finance committee. I mean, maybe that's part of what we could discuss on the 10th, what the overall process timeline might look like, particularly with the finance committee.
Even if it's a Zoom meeting, I think we have to have the all-day meeting because it's the finance committee. It is the board who has to ultimately decide. And
that's fine.
We're talking about some very complicated issues here that are going to take.
Okay, that's fine. And historically, has that been in September or August? Do you remember? September. Okay.
But we started last year. We started like July. We started early and continued. We started really early last year.
Yeah. Yes. So this works well.
Much, but we did start early.
This works well.
Any other comments from the board with regards to future workshop topics? We're good.
Vanessa, can you hear me? This is Diana.
Yes, go ahead, Diana. It's all you.
Okay. Hey, is there anything that should be added on there at this point for the RFP? I know we've talked a little bit back and forth, but does that need to be firmed up any point in the next month or 2 months?
Vanessa,
go ahead, Brian. Yep.
In the budget stuff that I'll be putting together for our conversation as part of the budget cycle. So
so that'll be part of it.
We'll have to discuss in the August timeframe, probably at one of our workshops.
Thank you.
Susan?
I'll also add that the contract with Yellowstone ends December 31st, and we have the option to renew it or go out to RFP. And so we'll need to make that decision pretty quickly, because if we want to go out to RFP, we need to, there's a lot of work involved with that.
Can we engage Mike? Can we engage Mike in that process too, Susan? Have a conversation with him?
Absolutely.
Well, I'm just meaning
Absolutely.
even now, as we move forward, just engage Mike and have a conversation. We can even have that sooner rather than later if you need the board on there for that. But I think that having a conversation and getting his insight as to how everything's been going will be helpful.
Right. We've had the discussion, Mike and I, we meet weekly. I meet with all of my department heads weekly. And so we have had that discussion. So we're prepared for it.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, that was a detailed process. I was part of that with Paul Collins as the two board liaisons 3 years ago, I think. I know Todd wrote the RFP, and then we interviewed different applicants. We set up a scoring rubric for each of the applications that we scored independently. I think there were 5 of us total in that process. So if we're going to go forward with an RFP process for landscape, we need to get on with that. You're exactly right.
Any other comments from the board?
We have one other agenda item. It was that we brought on when we modified the agenda at the beginning about committee meetings and Zoom.
Oh, yeah, thank you. Sorry about that. I didn't put it. I'm looking at the agenda. I'm like, I don't see it on here at all. Sorry about that.
Unless I was asleep.
No, I didn't write it down. So that was on me. I'll take full blame.
That's fine. That's fine. That's fine.
So Zoom meetings, I think part of our challenge now is our getting Zoom bombed. So we need to make sure that everything is kind of sealed off to the side going forward. That's already been discussed moving forward from July 10th on. We'll have to have that, start posting those things behind our firewall. With regards to committee meetings, the special events specifically, I think it's important to recognize that right now they are having some conversations with regards to contracts that that may or may not happen, but we need to be aware that contract conversations are something that perhaps we don't want published. And different agenda, I mean, the acts, the different bookings and things like that they have for entertainment is a lot of that they try to keep behind the scenes, because they either may or may not happen, but it's also in a more in-depth conversation. So Susan, what were your thoughts on this? If you can help us out a little bit.
I think that the special events committee is meeting on Tuesday, and I think that they are going to be discussing contracts at that meeting. But I would think that let's get their input about that. At this point in time, it would go out to the liaison and then those members who didn't want to attend in person, and then we'll open it up to wider audiences as there's not so many confidential issues being discussed.
Okay. Any board comments on with regards to this? I think it's, go ahead.
Yeah, David here. I have 2 broad comments. One is I can understand if there's something about contracts that we don't want widely discussed, because it could jeopardize actually the contract. So I know that JR can correct me on that. So I can understand that being closed. But I think the broader discussion, just as with any committee, dog park, recreation, I think the broader discussions should be open. So we may want to discuss having the meeting, if you publicize, of course, it's behind the firewall, so it's our residents only. But having the meeting being publicly available, but if we have to go into, if that committee has to go into a closed session because of contract issues, then you close it down. I mean, or maybe you go to a different meeting. But I think, I wouldn't say all special, I would argue against all special events committee meetings being closed. I would argue for contract discussions being closed.
Well,
so that's a broad concept.
How are they doing it today? Because committee meetings are all open to the public today, so anybody who came to the meeting would hear this. So What is changing? I guess that's what I'm asking then, following up on David's comment.
That's a good question.
Well, I will
do
say
others
they've met
come-
in person.
Do
Go
others
ahead,
come to,
David.
do others come? To Brian's point, could any resident show up at a special events committee meeting and just listen? Any resident?
Dory's on, so let's talk to Dory.
I don't know.
Thank you. Yes, hi, this is Dory, Chair of Special Events. Currently, we are going to have our first meeting on Tuesday, and we're going to be in person. We canvassed the committee to see if they would like to Zoom or they would like to meet in person with social distancing, as the Finance Committee is doing. And everyone, except for one, did not respond, agreed that they prefer to meet in person. All of our meetings are posted, and all of our meetings are open to residents.
Okay.
And it is yes, and every meeting. And my question would be, would it be possible, because from month to month, we have, various agenda items, but you usually always have a replay of where we are and what's coming forward. So we're often talking about contracts, we do have non-disclosure agreements oftentimes on them. So that does make it difficult to determine which meeting it's going to be, because oftentimes it's every meeting because we're getting updates. So my question would be is if the Zoom portion of that can be a committee-based decision for special events, because we do have some, sensitive information and agreements being discussed on an ongoing basis. But the other thing is that with this meeting, we did say that if you were not able to attend, we would have a call-in number. And that way, anyone could call in, but we would know. And the problem is we had recently we put it out, an event coming up, and our event was sort of taken and and another person took the exact same event, which was unique in itself, and then they were going to go into our different parks, and none of that came through Parks and Rec with an agreement or proposal to request that. So that was a little strange, but it was also not an appropriate, and it went onto the back porch. And that's the thing, is a lot of these things, when we talk about pricing and we talk about what we're going to do, I don't think that it should be all people should listen in and then take it to the back porch and do a replay of what we have discussed, because I think that some of the information needs to stay, because it's a constant flow of information. And I would just say that if we could stay with the course that we have now, where we do meet, we do have a call-in number, but we know who's calling in, and that's what's, I think, important, and not that the whole conversation is placed on the back porch and someone else sort of hacks the event and does their own event of the same type. I hope that explains it.
Thanks, Dory. Brian, go ahead and make your comment.
At the board meeting the other day, I thought we made a decision that we were not going to have in-person committee meetings, but we were going to go with the Zoom process for the third quarter because of the outbreak of COVID.
The what?
Because of
The
outbreak.
the infection rate. I thought, because you all saw after the meeting where I sent an email to the entire finance committee and copied the entire board and said that the board made a decision at the board meeting that we were going to do Zoom meetings and not in-person meetings.
Well, we didn't get that, but that's not a problem for this next meeting. We can easily do that and change course. But as going forward, I just asked the board if nothing else, to let the committee, if it be a committee-based decision on the Zoom, we will have the call-in numbers and the meetings will be open, and not just maybe to do across the board into perpetuity.
Brian?
Okay, so the Zoom meeting decision was for the third quarter only, I think. David can correct me if I'm wrong.
I think that's correct. It's not forever.
Pardon?
It's not forever. It's for the third quarter, which starts July 1, which is Wednesday.
I actually hope we can do a board meeting in person too. But I would have no problem with having private sessions of committees if we need to for confidentiality reasons, because the finance committee had the exact same conversation. There are certain things that we could discuss at a finance committee that the last thing we want to do is engage in public against ourselves. So to me, that's a reality that we need to deal with on several committees. You could take,
So I guess
we talked about the ADA, for example, if, you know, there are certain things you just need to confidentially deal with.
So we need to problem solve with this. I think my biggest challenge is the one coming up next week. We have not resolved our Zoom bombing issue, and I think that's one thing. Conference call. How can we work a conference call? Can we post it behind our firewall, Susan, or what can we do? How can we work this?
Well, we can absolutely post a conference call behind the firewall. It's not a firewall, password protected. No problem. So that's not an issue at all. And we can always have a publicly posted agenda that tells people how to get behind the password protection. Tom Slayton has said that is the best way to protect us, and it meets the 720 requirements for noticing meetings.
Okay. Comments, questions?
And Tuesday's meeting for special events is still in the second quarter. So is it our understanding that would go forward with a face-to-face? I, for one, will not be present. I'm the liaison, and I will be calling in or Zooming in, whatever way there is.
I guess I'm going to backtrack on this. Do we need to micromanage this? I mean, that's my biggest concern is, so I feel like we need to make sure that we're I think we're getting into the weeds as to what is or isn't important. We want to make sure that our residents are safe. We want to make sure that we're making good decisions. We're wanting to make sure that we don't negotiate against ourselves. We want to make sure that the events we're doing have some level of propriety. So I just don't want to get into the weeds with this either. So I'll open that comment up to whoever. If you want to make a motion, however you want.
And that anyone who doesn't feel comfortable, if we have something in person, that they can call in if they choose to do so.
Exactly. David, I think that's the best idea. Give them the option. If they want to call in, call in. If they want to go in person, as long as they social distance and they're comfortable with it, we can't I don't think we should do that. I mean, I'm comfortable social distancing as long as everyone has their precautions in place. But I kind of agree with what Vanessa's saying. We need to let them do some things on their own and not micromanage this.
At the larger level, we did decide the other night for third quarter, having everything virtual. I think we did decide that.
We did. I mean, so I'm willing to open up the conversation again, but we made a decision and now we're changing. That's what I'm struggling with.
So let's push this back then, Susan, and management. Help facilitate this with the special events so that they can stay compliant with the rules of the board, and come up with a solution and let us know what it is. And if anybody has a problem with it, we can let it. I feel like we're managing something that, you know, that we want to make sure that residents understand what's going on. We don't want to jeopardize things. I just don't want to get into we're getting into the weeds about a lot of things. And it's 11:30 and I'm tired, so I apologize.
And it's Friday.
It's Friday.
It's the
and I've got
weekend.
emails all week, so I apologize to those of you who are on here. You got me in a grumpy mood. Sorry.
We can absolutely work with special events, come up with something that works for them and work to meet the requirements of 720, and we'll report it to you, the board.
That's the only committee where we had cautions from last week. So I mean, to me, that's the only place where we're getting in the weeds. I think the others are all virtual.
Any other comments, questions from the board? Okay. So in the effort to not be grumpy anymore, is there any other issues? We have our next workshop on Friday, July the 10th. Sorry, I'm not sure why I keep on saying the 11th. July the 10th. Any other comments from the board before we open up or before we close down?
It's 5 o'clock somewhere.
Yeah, my glass is still empty. I not for long. So on that note, I hope everybody has a terrific holiday weekend and all that stuff coming up in a couple weeks. Please, do I have a motion to adjourn? Do I have more conversation? What do I have?
How about a motion to adjourn? I don't see any hands.
There's nothing else on the agenda, and I don't see any hands. So
I see no hands, so I make a
Brian, you look
motion to
really
adjourn.
puzzled. Okay.
You're muted.
He's muted.
No, I'm fine.
All right.
Motion to adjourn then.
I'll second that motion. I'll
Thank
second
you.
that motion.
That's
Thanks,
Diana.
Diana. Second. All in favor?
Aye.
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 Thank you all.
Thanks,
Thank-
everyone.
Thank
Be
you.
safe.
Thank you. Good
Thank you.
weekend. Happy 4th.
Yeah. Happy 4th.